evening from the foundation. We invite all of you for a webinar just to discuss how to go about with metastatic colorectal cancer with the latest data which is available and how do we use on our daily practice. So with this, I start on, I invite our chairperson of this meetings today evening, that is Dr. Sai Ram. Okay, just 1 minute. And sir is a director and senior consultant oncologist at Swarna Sai Hospital at Hyderabad. Our co-chairperson is Dr. Srinivasan Krishnan, who is the director, Srinivasan Rajalakshmi Memorial Hospital at Chennai. He is also a clinical radiation oncologist. So I hand over the mic and invite Dr. Sairam to take us with the introductory talk, and thereafter introduce the speakers and take us through. Sir, please see that we are not on time because there are many speakers and many panel-based discussion is there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for giving me the opportunity. As you all know that metastatic colorectal cancers are increasing in our country, and as per the international data, at least at the time of presentation, 1/3 of cases present as a metastatic colorectal cancers where they have all the screening modalities in place. Since we don't have any screening modalities, we expect that we have more cases than the international data of more than probably 1/3 cases we would be definitely seeing as a at presentation with colorectal cancers. And out of the patients uh, which undergo surgery and adjuvant treatment, out of them again about 30% of them will progress and they become a metastatic colorectal cancer. So in India, we have lot of metastatic colorectal cancer burden increasing of late, and fortunately we have lot of generic drugs available, and we have lot of testing facilities available, and fortunately we have lot of gastrointestinal advances available, and we have lot of PET-CT and other MRI modalities available, tumor markers available, and most of the time these at least basic treatments are available in government-sponsored programs. So we would like to hear more and more about the advances in management of at presentation colorectal cancers, because they need to be treated as a chronic disease, and we have lot of survival benefits by properly sequencing and diagnosing the patients by RAS, RAF, PDL, and this mutation burden and all other advances in testing facilities, so that we can give appropriate targeted therapies. We have also advances in stereotactic radiotherapy for oligometastatic in case surgery is not feasible. So we also have very good gastrointestinal surgeons and the surgical oncologists who are doing hepatectomy for metastatic uh, uh, colorectal cancers, and we have also cardiothoracic surgeons and lot of surgical oncologists doing even resection of lung secondary. So we are able to give best possible treatment from Indian scenario also, and we are nowhere lacking behind. I request Dr. Professor Anita to introduce the next speaker, whoever is due to speak now, and carry on further. And we welcome questions during the case presentations, and whenever you feel like anything to be clarified also, we can definitely spare time and uh, engage in the question answers section.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sairam. We go on to our first speaker of today's evening, Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam. He's a medical oncologist based at Madurai, and I request Dr. Krishna Kumar to take us through the sequencing and metastatic colorectal cancer.
Thank you, Anita ma'am, and very good evening to one and all present here.
So sorry, sir. So would you like to present your slides?
Yes, please. Can you share my screen?
Yeah, sure, sir.
So Dr. Sairam has already mentioned about the various facts. So I will quickly go into the, can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So I have about 15 minutes, and the topic of today is about sequencing targeted therapy. So basically we have, as of now in clinical practice, we have two targets. We may be getting more as days come further, but at least of today, we have the bevacizumab and then we have the EGFR blockers. So how are we going to sequence this targeted therapy? It has been always that you can use the target of your choice in a wild type RAS. You have the choice in a wild type RAS. So I'm not going to talk about RAF or mutant RAS. But of late, from 2016 and 17, 18 onwards, there's been a lot of talk on the sidedness of the colon cancer. So I will be running through a couple of points and then finally what could be the ideal approach for a metastatic colorectal cancer as far as sequencing of target therapy is concerned. So here we have, this gives you the global burden, and right on the point we had Dr. Sairam mention that the numbers may be skewed because we don't have traditional screening in India, and the numbers that show, they say about 3 to 4%, but it may be more. So now let us see about this targeted therapy. So when we are looking at targeted therapy, the most important point that came over from the 2014 and until date has been about where we all started. We started on the importance of RAS testing, which was done before the before the first line of therapy, which was introduced popularly in 2014. Then once we had the RAS wild type, we had late 2014 and early 2015, we had data that was confirming that the anti-EGFR therapy is quite effective, and a couple of trials which showed that it is better than bevacizumab as a first line therapy. And then as people started having more and more experience with the EGFR blockers, and 2016-17 was a time that already there was good experience on cytoreductive surgery and also chemo conversion concept. So people started talking about maximal tumor shrinkage, which could aid surgeons who attack a colorectal cancer with liver limited disease with a curative intent. So once again, that was being popularized, and I just have a problem. I think half of my screen is taken by the, just a second, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got it. So from there, when we moved forward, so these were the trials which I was trying to tell you. It was about the first line management of the RAS wild type tumors, where we had especially data from the CALGB and the FIRE3. So these were two studies. We had overall survival as an endpoint, where it was the FOLFOX or a FOLFIRI, and it was comparing the bevacizumab with cetuximab, where the cetuximab seemed to have an overall advantage. I will be coming into the specific at dissect the FIRE3 and the CALGB. PFS was the overall survivor, especially FIRE3. There was reasonable evidence that we were able to get an overall survival benefit with EGFR blockers in RAS wild type. And then, as I told you, towards the end of 2015-16, the concept of maximum tumor shrinkage, that is earlier tumor shrinkage, and the depth of response. And then here you can see this is the difference in the the baseline tumor load and the additional survival that you are able to get on patients who have a better tumor response. And this you can see by the delta OS and the delta PFS, and this was being talked about and which was presented. We have papers from different centers. Even this is a paper from India, where FOLFOX or FOLFIRI along with first line cetuximab, and this was presented by Dr. Somasekhar and group, and they also found that the patients who had a maximum depth of response, you can see that their median overall survival is definitely much better. So as we were talking about this, I clearly remember even Anita Ramesh ma'am came to our very own town, and there was a talk about what is right for the left, and those kind of sessions were going on. So we started talking about the sidedness of the tumor and the choice of therapy. So interestingly, during those days, I think it's about 2 years ago, we even had a discussion with the postgraduates we had from MMC and Adayar. So, I was getting the opinion that, the PGs used to say that if it's left, you give cetuximab, if it's right, you give bevacizumab. So I think life was not as simple as that. So today, I'm just going to talk a little bit further than that kind of a simplified concept. So let's take the left-sided tumor location. So we are talking about the wild type RAS, and we are talking about the EGFR blockers. And this was a trial, the 80405 CALGB trial, which clearly showed that the cetuximab was proven to be much better than the bevacizumab. And you can see that there was a difference in the overall survival, which I have showed. And this, interestingly, was found at various time points. At 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years, there was a sustained the separation of curves. If you take the FIRE3 data and then when they did the subset analysis, once again, they were able to see this kind of a separation of curves where the cetuximab given along with chemotherapy, especially in the left-sided colon cancer, seemed to definitely do much better than bevacizumab, which was also sustained over time at 3, 4, and 5 years. And you can see that there is a statistical significance and a hazard ratio of 0.63. So see, looking at these two, you can say the tumor location, especially if it's a left side, is not only just a prognostic marker, but it's also a predictive marker where you're able to say that these patients will respond definitely to an EGFR blocker compared to bevacizumab. So now let us see, let us assume that finances were away. Sai Ram sir mentioned that we have a lot of generics, so people are starting to use biologicals on day one. Let us say that we became affluent enough, and let us take the 100% people who can afford first line therapy with a biological. By the time they finish second and they go to third line, the people who can actually take biological therapy in a realistic sense comes down to nearly 40%. So suppose this patient receives, let us say a patient receives cetuximab, and on second line, patient receives bevacizumab and then goes on for third line therapy. We had a talk some time back on what you can give beyond third line in one of the webinars. So if this was the survival, let us say if they reverse the situation, especially if you take the CALGB, the FIRE3, and the patients out of the PEAK study, here we had a survival of about 38 months, let us say 38 to 39 months. But when you took the patients who received the other way around, this was about 32 months. And from the FIRE3, you can say it's about 28 months. So, and of course, PEAK, it was even lesser. It was about 25 months median survival compared to about 39 months. So if you look at this data, starting with the bevacizumab, patient is likely to have a shorter survival. Now, I will come on to say why that happens. See, here it is just not only the survival curves. It's about how many people are also getting the biological. So what happens is when the patient already fails the first line, only about 45% of the initial cohort is going to get a biological. So the gross numbers treated itself, you'll have a lot of people falling out of the curves. And on addition to that, see, this is just to show about the tumor shrinkage, not related to what we were talking in the previous slide. But if you see, bevacizumab, we all know its mechanism of action. It actually inhibits angiogenesis, neovascular angiogenesis. So the blood supply to the tumor is going to get shrinking. So what happens is this also has an inadvertent effect on the way your second biological is going to reach the tumor. So if these patients, if you have a tumor cell and you give bevacizumab, and then you're going to block all the angiogenesis and the neovascular blood vessels, the leaky blood vessels, which are going to carry the chemotherapy and the biologicals, at least about 40% lesser EGFR inhibitors reaches the tumor cell, so there is going to be less efficient tumor cell killing. So this has been one of the concepts where why they always feel that, now going back to the old slide. So that is probably the reason why when you start off with an EGFR blocker in a wild type RAS mutated tumor, they will tend to do much better than starting off with a bevacizumab. So now cetuximab and panitumumab, these are the two drugs in our basket. And if you are going to use them behind or after a bevacizumab, then probably, the effect is not going to be, as well as we see. And they normally say that if you're going to use it, especially, you should have a wash period of at least about 3 months for the effect of the bevaz to go out. And then once again, when you give the EGFR blockers, they will start working. So there is going to be some timeline. So if you're looking at patients who received only Bev and then went on with Bev on beyond progression like a main or as a maintenance, and then later gave EGFR, if you have an average survival of 29 months, if you switch it the other way around, you're likely to get about 39 months. It's about 10 months difference in the survival. So cetuximab plus chemotherapy with a median overall survival for left-sided wild type metastatic colorectal cancer is something from the SWOG 80405 we are able to clearly conclude. So could we go home with the message that if it's left-sided, yes, if it's a wild type RAS mutated, RAS not mutated tumor, wild type tumor, cetuximab or EGFR blocker especially can do better with chemotherapy. So now what about, let us go to the other. So is cetuximab is of value for right side tumor. Just as I told the PGs, when we had a discussion, there was a knee-jerk response. Right side we will give Bev and left side we will give cetuximab. I think life was not as simple as that. We need to do a little bit of dissection. So now I have just taken certain subsets out of the FIRE3 and the CALGB, and then let us see what happened. The overall survival was appeared to be a little better with Bev over EGFR, but actually they were not statistically significant in the right-sided. So this is the subset analysis of the right-sided metastatic colorectal cancer. So what did they find? See, if you see, this is the meta-analysis of all the 3 studies. Just see the plot where the, where it is placed. You can see it has not achieved a statistical significance. So basically on the left side, the robust data that EGFR blockers could generate, this could not be replicated on the right side, and Bev appeared either non-inferior or slightly better than the EGFR blockers. And it goes to say that the right side tumors are the ones, especially with poorly differentiated histology, they may be either MSI deficient, they may have the RAF mutation. So these all could actually contribute to poorer survival in the right-sided colon cancer, where the ball game is totally different. So that was something. So coming back, so while choosing the right therapy for the right side of colon cancer, if you're looking at it, what is the evidence that we are having? Well, this was the plot which I tried showing to you. So this is the Halk meta-analysis of the first line anti-EGFR versus anti-VEGF in the right side. And when you look at it, these are the figures. So let us take a situation. There is a right-sided colon cancer. The patient is a wild type tumor. Patient has a solitary metastasis, or patient has a large bulky tumor, and this tumor can go for obstruction. We are not taking him for a ileostomy or something like that, but he's got a bulky tumor. We want a quick response. Or we have a very good aggressive colorectal surgeon who says, I would like to do a metastasectomy after 6 to 8 weeks. Well, if an overall response to therapy is considered in the right side colon cancer, considering all the facts which I've told earlier regarding, the VEGF inhibition and the decreased tumor uptake of the EGFR blockers, I think still the EGFR blockers have its role in right side colon cancer also. And especially if you take the right side also, the depth of the tumor response. See, these are all post analysis. It's not like done as a prime. When you take the subset analysis, whether it was right or whether it was left, we were able to see that the depth of tumor response did have its effect, and there was this early tumor shrinkage. So whenever you are looking at this so-called aspect of a disease control and a cytoreduction, and it's a wild type tumor, the EGFR blockers can also be used in right side colon cancer. So now let us try to see what are the goals for the patients who with right side colon cancer, and then decide, are you going to talk about Bev or are you going to talk about the EGFR blockers? It's not like right Bev and left cetuximab. So if you're really looking at cytoreduction, once again, I'm just bringing that point back. If you're looking at cytoreduction and a conversion therapy, I think the EGFR blockers have its role, and especially if you're going to look at, you have a lot of liver metastasis, even if you're not going to look at chemo conversion, you want a quick tumor shrinkage and an adequate depth of response. You can see the curve. Cetuximab has a deeper response, and let us, keeping survival apart, at least you will have a short-term goal of shrinking the tumor better with EGFR blockers. So if you even now take the ESMO guidelines, see, they are going to classify the patient based on the molecular status, and then they are leaving it to you whether you're going to give a CT doublet with an anti-EGFR, or are you going to give it along with the Bev. And if the patient has a BRAF mutant tumor, and especially with the recent studies that have come and which have been presented in ASCO, which Madam will be presenting, even in a RAF mutant, because of the feedback loop, there is a hypothesis and there is also a science behind the EGFR blockers being given along with RAF inhibitors. So even whether if it's a right side tumor or a left side tumor, I think our overall approach is kind of going to be the same. And especially if you're looking at a shrinkage, I think the EGFR blockers will score an edge over bevacizumab. So similarly, things were discussed even in the Asia ESMO, and definitely if the cytoreduction is needed and you need an aggressive treatment for an aggressive biology, and especially those, if you're looking at the most aggressive treatment, which I think most of us, FOLFIRINOX, which at least I don't use very frequently, is supposed to have the best response rates.
Okay, Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam, if you can finish it. Yeah, fine. That's
Last slide, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So in the left side, RAS wild type mutant CRC, whenever you're going to choose the right sequence to improve the outcome, anti-EGFR followed by anti-VEGF, which has shown to prove about 39 months of overall survival, could be a reasonable option. In the right side, RAS wild type, yes, science, and if you go by guidelines, both are non-inferior. VEGF may tend to have a slightly higher survival, maybe not very significant, but has a tend to better survival. But if chemo conversion is the goal, and if the patient, or if you want a quick maximum response, then still EGFR blockers may score over anti-VEGF blockers. Thank you. I think I've stuck to my 15 minutes after starting 3 minutes late, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was good, Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam. And stay with us because we have a lot of discussion with you. And we move on to the next speaker. Are all anti-EGFR same? I invite Dr. Jayachandran, who is Associate Professor in Cancer Institute, Adyar, Chennai, to take us in the next 15 minutes with his talk. Dr. Jayachandran, please.
Yes, ma'am. So, good evening to everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah, audible. Where are you? You're not visible.
Just a second, ma'am.
Yeah, put your video on so that we see you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
we can see you, we can hear you. Please take us through.
Yeah. Good evening to everyone. So, thank you, madam, from Sairam from Cancer Center and Merck Oncology for giving me this opportunity. So my topic for today evening is all anti-EGFRs same. So what I'm going to deal about is the two anti-EGFRs which have been approved in the use for colon cancer, metastatic colon cancer. So these are cetuximab and the panitumumab. So if you look at that cetuximab, let us go through it one by one. Mechanism of action, the biology, the evidence and the toxicity and the use for other cancers. So if you look at the cetuximab, it is an IgG1 antibody. It's a chimeric antibody, whereas panitumumab is IgG2 fully human antibody. So there are differences between IgG1 and IgG2 antibody. Important is the IgG2 antibody does not stimulate the immune system. It is limited to the EGFR blockade only. If you look at the IgG1 antibody, it has additional effects like the activation of the macrophage to release the chemoattractants to recruit the cytotoxic T cells to the microenvironment, which later on kills using the immunologically it is stimulated, and it also activates the NK cells and dendritic cells, and also it triggers the NK cell mediated antibody dependent cytotoxicity, which all are not being done by the panitumumab, which is the IgG2 antibody. If you look at this is a pictorial representation of the whole thing, looking at how does cetuximab additionally influences the activity. It has an ADCC, it has an CDCC, it has an complementary cytotoxicity, and also it recruits the dendritic cells and also activates the macrophages and causes cytotoxic T cell recruitment and NK cell recruitment, which later on migrates into and infiltrates and attacks the immunologically attacks the using the T cell receptors. So coming on to the molecule per se, cetuximab and panitumumab, as I said, are different antibodies. So this is the EGFR receptor, and this, which is in yellow, is the EGFR binding site, which is the native receptor. Native moiety is EGFR binding site, and this, which is present in the red color, is the cetuximab binding site, and which is present in blue color is the red color is the panitumumab binding site, and the blue color is the cetuximab binding site. And there are overlaps between the EGFR and cetuximab, and we see that there's not a major difference between the binding sites of the cetuximab and the panitumumab. So if you look at the affinity, of the cetuximab compared to panitumumab, so the panitumumab has a higher affinity compared to the cetuximab. So I'm putting a goal to the longer quote. Maybe I'll change my views in the next slide. If you look at the panitumumab, it has a more affinity and it binds more actively to the EGFR receptors. That means that it starts binding to more number of the drug which is being concentrated more towards the periphery and binds more towards the more number of cells in the EGFR in the periphery, and it does not gets diffused into the center of the tumor cell. And this is being proved by in vitro studies only. And this is an hypothesis. If you look at this slide, we can clearly see what is being with what I am trying to explain. If the panitumumab has a higher affinity, it starts binding to the cells which are in the periphery and gets saturated in the periphery. Whereas cetuximab, which has a slightly lesser affinity, binds uniformly to all the EGFR inhibitors, all the EGFR expressing cells in the tumor. So the depth of activity is better with cetuximab, which has been proved by in vitro studies. So now let us see whether these are all in vitro studies and hypotheses and the biology of the agents. Let us look into the evidence. I think looking into the evidence, these trials are the Crystal trial, the Taylor trial, and the Prime trial. These trials are trials which have been done in comparison with cetuximab with chemotherapy compared to the chemotherapy alone. The Crystal trial is the trial which uses FOLFIRI as the background chemotherapy using with cetuximab and compared to FOLFIRI alone. Whereas Taylor trial uses cetuximab with FOLFOX compared to FOLFOX alone, and the PRIME trial uses panitumumab with FOLFOX. This is FOLFOX alone. All these trials have shown a overall survival benefit when compared to only the chemotherapy. To note that panitumumab has not been evaluated with FOLFIRI, and it has no evidence to be used with the FOLFIRI. It has been used only with FOLFOX. So coming into the trial endpoints in detail, if you look at the left-sided subset, the PFS, OS, and the overall response rate seems to be better in the left-sided subset. Minded, this is an retrospective analysis. Retrospectively, it has been post-hoc the analysis of this trial, and this trial, as this crystal trial, all both PFS, OS, and the overall survival benefit has been significant. And if you look at the Taylor trial, which has been conducted with oxaliplatin-based chemotherapy, again there was a significant PFS, significant OS, and overall response rate in the left-sided subset. If you look at the PRIME study, again, if you look at this, it also shows all the benefit. It shows us PFS benefit, it shows an overall survival benefit, and also overall response rate benefit. Only thing is the PRIME, this subset of patients where we cannot, this has not been tried with the irinotecan chemotherapy. The more important is whether to use bevacizumab or to use cetuximab upfront in a left-sided colon cancer with a wild-type RAS gene. So whether it is the debate, patients may be eligible for both, and be whether to choose the cetuximab and bevacizumab is the very key question. So there are 3 trials addressing this. One is FIRE trial. So it is this one is a FIRE trial, another is a CALGB trial, another PEAK trial. If you look at the FIRE trial, this is a trial which is FOLFIRI with cetuximab versus bevacizumab and FOLFIRI. So comparing, this is a left-sided subset in the left-sided RAS wild-type subset of this trial. So if you look at this subset, there was a overall survival benefit when compared to bevacizumab in using cetuximab, and in using FOLFOX or FOLFIRI in a CALGB SWOG trial, again there was a benefit in using cetuximab upfront. There was a overall survival benefit, and in PEAK trial, it was a phase 2 trial looking at the use of panitumumab with FOLFOX compared to bevacizumab with FOLFOX, and again it also showed an overall survival benefit. So let us go into this trial results in detail. If you look at these trial, there are contrasting PFS results, whereas OS results are better. Why? Let me explain. So this is a FIRE trial endpoints. If you look at the PFS, there was no difference in the PFS, but there was a significantly different OS in the subset where cetuximab was used upfront with the FOLFIRI. So again, this is a CALGB trial where there was no significant PFS benefit, but there was a significant OS benefit. So this, which explained by which that the arm which has cetuximab has a better overall survival because the sequencing of this chemotherapy, initially using cetuximab followed by bevacizumab, has yielded a better overall survival compared to that of initial use of bevacizumab followed by cetuximab. Obviously, a patient with a wild type RAS getting bevacizumab would have gotten cetuximab in the second line. So sequencing the chemotherapy using cetuximab first and using bevacizumab later on with the has yielded a better overall survival, and they were significant in both the trials using cetuximab upfront. This is what we are taking here. And looking at the PEAK study, again, if you look at this study, there was a PFS benefit and there was an overall survival benefit. Again, this was only tried with the FOLFOX regimen, not with the FOLFIRI regimen. Looking into the toxicities. This toxicity, if you look at the toxicity, this is a meta-analysis which uses phase 2 and phase 3 trial RCTs of multiple trials in the metastatic CRC setting. If you look at the toxicities in this meta-analysis, if you look at the SAEs, it was significantly higher in the panitumumab-based chemotherapy arms, and the death was also slightly higher in the panitumumab-based chemotherapy arms. If you look at the hypomagnesemia rates, if you look at the skin toxicity rates and the neutropenia, were all higher in the use of panitumumab with the chemotherapy-based compared to cetuximab with the chemotherapy-based. So, looking at the evidence, if looking into the OS benefit and looking into the mechanism of action. Mechanism again, as I triggered, it triggers more of NK cell mediated hepatotoxicity. Looking into the evidence, again, it has been tried only with panitumumab has been tried only with FOLFOX, whereas cetuximab has been tried with both FOLFOX and FOLFIRI. And again, it has been indicated in other subset like head and neck cancers also. And safety wise also, the cetuximab has a better tolerable profile compared to the panitumumab, even though there are no head-to-head comparisons. So, I'm concluding with this saying that there are some differences between using both cetuximab and panitumumab. Choosing a patient and choosing the IGFR wisely is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jayachandran, for just taking us through how we can choose our anti-EGFR and what is different from the other. And now I invite Dr. Kripa Shankar from Coimbatore to take us through a case-based discussion on a metastatic colorectal cancer. Okay, also I invite my panelists, Dr. Bhabesh Poladia, Dr. Jovita Martin, Dr. Shiva Kumar, Dr. Karthik N, Dr. Smita Kyle, Dr. Anuradha, Dr. Paulami Mukherjee, Dr. Vinod Kumar Radhakrishnan, Dr. Ganesh Venkatraman, and Dr. Chandra Mauleshwari. I think we also have two other participants which have also joined us. That is Dr. Madhulika, radiation oncologist, and Dr. Mohan Raj Natarajan, surgical oncologist from Coimbatore. Okay, let's, Dr. Kripa, I hand over the mic to take us through with all your discussion on this metastatic colorectal cancer.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So very good evening to all of you. And at the outset, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the organizers and also the Freedom from Cancer Trust for having put together the CME and also for the opportunity. So when I decided to do the panel discussion, I thought no more right versus left and no more sequencing because, you know, there is no talk on metastatic CRC without any of these discussions. So we have quite a distinguished panel with us today, a heady mix of molecular oncologists, oncopathologists, medical, surgical, and radiation oncologists. So I welcome all of you. And the idea was to get all of you involved into the discussion as well. So moving on to the first thing, probably I'll start with Bhavesh. So you have a newly diagnosed patient with metastatic CRC. What are the list of biomarkers that you would like to do?
So at the beginning, I would like to do ALRAS and BRAF.
Okay.
But now I think even MSIH also I will do as a first line.
Okay, and your thoughts on probably testing for a HER2 or a PI3K as well? Would you like to do that as well? And if so, why?
HER2 maybe yes, PIK3 not, maybe not.
Okay, and why would you want to do a HER2 upfront, Bhavesh, if I can ask you that?
The percentage is very low,
Okay.
and hardly I think is the major benefit is not seen.
Okay, so yeah, so like Bhavesh was rightly pointing out, we would definitely like to do a PAN-RAS, a BRAF, and an MSA as well. So the thing about HER2 testing or a PI3K for that matter as well, we've heard from the previous talks as probably, you know, wild type you would probably want to use cetuximab or panitumumab EGFR blockers. So the thing is, if you have a HER2 mutation or an amplification, or if you have a PI3K amplification, then your EGFR inhibitors are still not going to work. So probably for that, from that point of view, you would probably be inclined to do, even though the incidence is less than 5%, as was rightly pointed out, you would still want to contemplate doing it. So to our pathologist here, Dr. Chandramouli Sri ma'am.
Yes.
So
yes.
what would be the incidence of KRAS mutation, ma'am?
KRAS mutations, 40% sir, of colorectal cancers harbor a KRAS mutation and 10% harbor an NRAS mutation. But the literature says that once KRAS is positive, you can actually stop short without doing an NRAS also. But
Yeah,
I would
perfect.
like your views on that.
So you're very right, ma'am. So I mean, like it's around 30 to 40%, as you rightly pointed out. And your thoughts on MSI testing and how would you want to do an MSI testing? Would you do it on IHC or would you do it on IHC and PCR? And how would you and who would you want to do a germline testing as well for, ma'am?
MSI testing, actually, as Dr. Bhavesh was rightly pointing out, it is recommended for all colorectal cancers. And then, of course, initially some clinical parameters were used to select patients for an MSI testing, but it is not anymore so. Even in endometrial, it's like that. Like for any endometrial carcinomas, we go ahead and do an MSI testing. And in our laboratory, what we generally do is to use an immunohistochemistry for testing for MLH, MSH2, MLH1, MSH2, MSH6, and PMS2. So once we find any abnormality in MLH1, then we go ahead and do ideally we are supposed to do a methylation specific PCR, but in our laboratory, methylation specific PCR is not available. So as a surrogate, we go ahead and do a BRAF mutation status. So in case BRAF mutation is present, it means that it is not germline. We consider it to be a sporadic mutation and go ahead with that, because it doesn't, only 1% of BRAF mutation coexists with a Lynch syndrome. So beyond that, all other BRAF mutation positive, MLH deficient or deficient MMR status is sporadic in origin.
Yeah.
And then if it is just one more sentence. MSH2,
sure.
MSH6, PMS2 negative, consider the possibility of a genetic mutation. And then with that, we are not supposed to stop short. We have to go ahead and do an NGS technique to confirm the presence or absence of the germline mutation. So it is either IHC or a PCR. And in our laboratory, we chose IHC over a PCR because none of them are actually superior to each other.
Okay. So like rightly pointed out, I think the concordance between an IHC and PCR is to the tune of 90 to 95%. And an IHC can only tell you the expression, protein expression, whether it's deficient or proficient MMR. So we take that as an indirect way of saying whether it's MSI high or low. Ideally, yes, you would like to do both as well, or you could do an NGS like you rightly pointed out. But again, there is the fifth marker as well apart from this, which is the epithelial cell adhesion molecule. And the unique thing about these four proteins is that MLH1 and PMS2 only pair with each other. And if either of those expression is lost, then you'd go on to the next step of the algorithm, which is to do a BRAF V600. And if that is negative, then you do a MLH promoter methylation as well. And then if that is also negative, then you would want to do a germline testing as well. I think that's the algorithm that you were also alluding to. So moving on to probably the next part of the discussion, would you actually want to do a biopsy from the primary site, or is it okay to doing it from the metastatic site? Or your thoughts on tumor heterogeneity as well? Any other pathologists, or madam, you can take this question as well.
Primary or secondary, as per literature, actually does not matter, sir. There is no discordance in the mutation status between a primary and a secondary tumor is what I have read in the literature. So it is okay whether you biopsy the primary site or even the metastatic.
So yeah, the tumor heterogeneity is much lesser as far as colorectal cancer is concerned. It's only to the tune of 3 to 5%. But your thoughts on actually doing a RAS testing at the time of progression? And do you think it's actually dynamic, and could that be a clonal evolution as well? For example,
we also have Professor Anuradha with us, Dr. Vinod with us, and Dr. Ganesh Venkatraman with us.
Yeah, please. I'm like any of them, ma'am.
Question, please.
Sir, this is Dr. Ganesh from Genetics Department of Ramchandra.
Please. So
our based on the literature, which clearly shows that the percentage of KRAS mutations is actually more than what we've been discussing. It's close to 60% or more has been shown to be positive KRAS mutations, and that too the sites of these mutations are equally important, because mutations in which exons is something very important to be determined. So recent literature in 2019 published in JCO shows that close to 60 to 62% of colorectal cancers have KRAS mutations, and close to 5 to 10% of them have NRAS and a combination of those. So essentially, we are looking at a total mutation load of close to 80% of colorectal cancers have these KRAS mutations. So we need, it's essential that RAS mutation testing has to be done more, because the findings from that paper says that close to 50% of the patients who underwent treatment for colorectal cancers were not tested for these mutations, and the amount of money that was spent on these treatments was quite high. So the point of the paper was that we need to do more KRAS testing is the outcome from that paper. Anyone else, please?
Yeah, here this is Dr. Anuradha here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Ganesh what he has said right now, because KRAS incidence is very high, it's more than 60%. But also for the monitoring of the disease, I think we can go upon on the liquid biopsy testing,
Exactly.
because it's of less heterogeneity, so we can get more of tumor necrosis factor. I mean, the DNA yield will be more, and we can totally rely upon doing the molecular profiling by NGS on this. So liquid biopsy is quite a useful tool over here, which will give a lot of insight on the various prognostic and the diagnostic markers.
Yes, ma'am. That is owing to the sensitivity of the technique. So since the techniques that we are adopting are extremely sensitive.
Yes, Dr. Ganesh, if I could ask you, probably we've had Indian data as well to that effect, where the incidence of RAS does vary from the right side to the left side, number one. And the other thing is, would you actually advocate doing or checking for a RAS mutation again at the time of progression? And how many of us actually do that?
Sir, actually, I felt when I looked at the literature, the major hindrance is the cost factor involved in the testing. So generally, whether the physicians are willing to do a testing.
If cost is not a constraint, I think we can leave cost out of it. Cost is not a constraint. Would you still advocate?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because after the first line of treatment, before going to the second line, whether is it worthwhile to continue, that decision could be made upon the mutation status. So I would definitely feel that.
What percentage would actually, like change as far as the mutational status is concerned? Like, for example, a mutant being wild type or a wild type becoming mutant. What would be the proportion or what the percentage?
So that I'm not able to highlight, because the literature, what I could see was only from a very small handful of samples. So that is very difficult to gauge. I would request some other experts also to please.
Okay, I agree with you, probably, because most of us, I think, like probably I can get in the other medical oncologist view on this as well. Shiva, Karthik.
Dr. Vinod will be there for any comments from his side. He's also doing a lot of molecular oncology stuff.
Yeah, please, Dr. Vinod, you can give us your comments as well.
Yeah, I think the percentage what you asked is good with the 70 to 30. Like the 70%, like the people they respond to the KRAS, HRAS, all these types of drugs, and 30% is the population like this, they don't respond to this type of therapy. And that's how like the field emerged with the KRAS, HRAS, and later what happened was like there was one group of publications from the Harvard Medical Group with the CBTC assay. They just pointed like for the metastatic colorectal cancer, what are the top needs, like it needs to be done, and it's called as an IGF growth factor and the tyrosine hydroxylase. So that's the direction is moving, and as you know, like each and every person is doing, and the NGS need to be done, and the treatment part to be done. Yeah. And as Chandramolishwari was mentioning, like the methylation, that's a very critical part. Like the aging of the methylation and the PCR, that may be the perfect aspect.
So
by doing NGS, I think we can have a elaborated panel which can have a diagnostic and prognostic and predictive markers. Like in predictive markers, we can have KRAS, BRAF, PIK3CA, PTEN, ERCC1, which are very much important markers. While in the prognostic, we can look upon for the APC and P53 and VEGF markers, which are also quite important in future strategy plan.
Yeah, you're right, ma'am. You're right. But the important thing here probably is that when somebody becomes a wild type later on, is that they would become eligible for EGFR inhibitors later on. So that's the point that I was actually trying to touch on.
Exactly.
So yes, probably if finances are not a constraint, then obviously, yes, you would want to try and do it. So moving on, again, probably I can bring in the molecular oncologist here. What are the molecular subtypes of colon cancer that are coming up, and what are the implications that could have? Yep. Dr. Ganesh or anyone else? Any of the molecular oncologists can take that.
Again, I'll go with the literature. Literature clearly shows that close to 80% of these have these three predominant mutations: KRAS, NRAS, and the BRAF. Of course, EGFR detection has to be done
No.
without like as much as we do a HND to confirm, EGFR status has to be determined to make them eligible for any of these. So these are the primary ones which we should definitely do. Further to that, there are further to that, as Madam has just highlighted, there are several other markers as well. Yes, ma'am, please.
So, but are you asking about the consensus molecular subtypes?
Yeah. We're trying to touch on the consensus molecular subtypes here. Yeah. So you could probably touch on that.
Yeah, there are 4 subtypes: consensus molecular subtype 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, all of them depend on the gene expression profiling studies. Of course, inclusive of the expression of KRAS, BRAF, and PIK3, and HER2, and all those molecular biomarkers. So, consensus molecular subtype is actually deficient in MMR. Consensus molecular subtype 2 is otherwise called as the canonical or the classical pathway, and then the consensus molecular 3 subtype is a metabolic pathway, and 4 is subtype. And among them, actually, the mesenchymal subtype.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So you're right about that.
Having the worst prognosis among the 4 subtypes which we have.
Correct. So just like how we have molecular subtypes of breast cancer or any other cancer, now we've come out with the consensus molecular subtypes of colon cancer as well, where a CMS2 or canonical, where the Wnt and MYC pathway are activated. That's the most commonest type, and that has got a better survival as well after relapse. And CMS4 has got the worst prognosis. It's a mesenchymal subtype as well. So just touching on that. So moving on to the next thing, what would be the factors which actually affect your selection of first-line treatment in metastatic colorectal cancer? Probably bring in Karthik here. Karthik or Shiva, any of you take this question?
Yes. For the selection of first-line in metastatic colorectal cancer, I'd go with performance status, biomarker status, and financial constraints. 1, 2, and 6. So tumor-sidedness. When we are going with the biomarker status, tumor-sidedness would not have that much of importance. And treatment sequence, we are going in first line. So
like we heard from the earlier talk, which Dr. KKR also alluded to, sidedness and sequencing of the treatment strategies. Would you also take that into consideration, or you just say no?
Now it is first line, no. So first line,
metastatic CRC.
Okay, metastatic CRC. So we would not have used any other biological agents before. If it is not, if it's in the, not in the, if it is in the first line. So treatment sequence won't have much of importance in the first line when we are going to treat. And tumor-sidedness.
Let me give you an example, Karthik. Suppose you have somebody with a wild type, left-sided colon cancer, wild type. Would you choose EGFR or a VEGF inhibitor in the first line? And if so, why?
Left-sided wild type. So left-sided wild type, I would choose an EGFR only because
that probably is your sequencing strategy. You would want to go with an EGFR so that.
Initially, treatment sequence, then factors would be taken treatment sequence also.
Perfect. Okay. And then obviously a sidedness also, as you heard earlier, obviously it does impact on the survival, and also depending on what your primary aim is. For example, you would have had somebody with liver limited metastasis alone, and probably if your primary aim is cytoreduction and get them into conversion chemotherapy, then yes, probably sidedness is also important as well, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So moving on, I mean, like, what percentage of our patients actually go on to get second line and third line therapy in everyday practice? Shivakumar, if you're there, can you take this? Would you agree with this, or is it different in what you would see in your practice? Is Shiva around, or any other medical oncologist?
I would just like to add in a point. As per the study, it is quite depictive of the real scenario. So I would definitely agree with the response as well as the progression-free survival statistics that's given in the slide.
Okay, so you would say roughly about half of your patients go on to get second line, and about only 20% go on to get third line. Okay.
Yes, very much.
And what would be the options in your third line? I know these are all the list of options that we have, but what would be your third line options, and what do you use in your third line? I mean, like, I'm sure all of us, you would use either oxaliplatin and irinotecan in the first and second line, along with targeted therapies, if feasible. What would be your third line, your ideal third line?
If finance is not an issue, and if the patient has previously responded to the cetuximab, and if he's EGFR wild type, I think it is still not a bad idea to re-challenge them in the third line. However, if that is not possible, and because Bev is, I think, cheaper than the cetuximab, to be honest with you, so then I would choose Bev.
So you would prefer re-challenging them even if they have not been exposed to, let's say, regorafenib or any of the other like TAS. Maybe we don't have access to TAS 102, which is tipiracil uracil. These are all other approved options in the third line. So you're saying you would probably want to re-challenge these patients rather than try them on the other agents? Is that right?
I probably think that I would re-challenge. The reason is being I do not have an exposure to the drugs. That's the reason why I do that.
Okay, sure. Anybody else? Any other medical oncologists? Bhavesh, Shiva, Karthik, any of you?
Yes.
Yeah, Bhavesh?
I assume that in the first and the second line, already targeted plus chemotherapy, which is oxali and irinotecan has been used.
Correct.
I would still keep regorafenib as a simple option because it will be tablet form, and I expect that usually the PS is not very good once the patient comes to third line, and it is better that patient take a tablet at home rather than come to the hospital for injections.
So what would be the dose of regorafenib?
Can I just come on that one point, Kripa?
Yes, sir, please.
I think even right now, if you take the TAS 102 or the regorafenib, which has been told, although they say more than third line treatment, I think the best effect is seen when the patient is actually contrarily in a better performance status. When you push it to fourth or fifth line therapy, most of the time they have not seen the effect that comes in well. So if they come contrary to what we believe, the oral therapy that can come after failure of all drugs, most of the time after that, the PFS is not that good. So I think that was one point which I found while going through these.
Yeah, so I mean, like ideally, yes, sir. But then when we talk about third line, and that too in somebody who's already been exposed to oxaliplatin, irinotecan with targeted therapy as well, then regorafenib, given the fact that we have generics available now, it makes it cost effective as well. It's a good option to have. And we have data from the REDOSE study as well, which shows that you could start off with 80 milligrams and then do a weekly escalation protocol and reach up to 160. Even though in practice, rarely none of our patients, tolerate anything beyond 80 milligrams.
I think
and
more
again,
than the single agent, probably as years, at least the next 1 or 2 years comes the Rego, Nivo, and once all those come, probably they will start having more role along with an immunotherapy in this line of setting, especially in MSI positive.
Well, since you spoke about it, sir, your thoughts on actually immunotherapy and, in the third line and beyond?
If I look at it, yes, if it's a patient is MSI positive, MSI deficient tumor, and the patient is
you would reserve it in patients who are MSI high, DMMR, and that would be what would be the proportion of patients who actually have an MSI high or a DMMR, sir?
See, actually, the MSI testing we are not doing on a routine metastatic colorectal as of now. We've just thought of starting to doing it, but I'm not doing it routinely. I've been doing it more in the stage 2 setting, where we are triaging patients to whether they're going to go for chemo or not. So surprisingly, I'm finding a lot of patients who are MSI positive, although I'm not able to quote a number. So probably if you do it across the CRC, metastatic CRC, I don't know if Anjana is there in the panel today. I think the CMC does it as a routine panel. I think we will get more idea on what percentage is going to have MSI positive in our population.
So, what we have seen as well is that most of the times it tends to be stable, MSS, Microsoft Satellite stable. And only about 5 to 10%. This is what literature as well and what we have seen so far as well. It's only about 5 to 10% who actually have an MSI high, which means a DMMR or a deficient MMR. I don't know how. Probably the others can share their experience as well.
In our institution, I do agree with you, sir. Probably 5 to 7% of the patients do turn out to be deficient MMR. Others are proficient.
Okay, fair enough. And so this is data on immunotherapy as well in the third line. Probably it's approved in patients who have an MSI high or a DMMR, and they should have progressed on 5-FU and oxalin irinotecan. And now we have data in this current ASCO as well, where the keynote 177, where in the first line they've looked at pembrolizumab versus standard of care chemotherapy, it has shown a PFS benefit, 16 versus 8 months. We still don't have the overall survival data yet, and nor do you have the full. But the FDA has given it an accelerated approval now. So that's something that needs to be taken into account, but probably only a minority of patients who have a DMMR or MSI high in the first line. And your thoughts on re-challenging anybody with actually in practice, where would you contemplate doing a re-challenge? I mean, like, do you have a particular time frame, or how do you look at this challenge, re-challenging? Because yeah, there is a rationale behind it, because you're still looking at targeting the sensitive clones that are still left behind. So how many of us would actually do that in clinical practice? Probably any of the medical oncologists can take this. Jovita, because you brought this up, Dr. Jovita, so probably you can tell us. Do you do that in practice a lot? And what would be the time frame that you would probably be comfortable doing? Like, for example, when we say re-challenging oxaliplatin or Capox, we talk about at least 6 months to a year. So what would be your ideal time frame, or what sort of tumor progression would you look at when you try re-challenging?
So, Krupa, actually, to answer this, every time the patient progresses, I do not know if a lot of people do decide to do another biopsy to check for the molecular status again, whether it remains to be KRAS wild type or mutated and stuff like that. But I would want to be a little curious to, do the biopsy whenever they progress. If we can illustrate the fact that it remains to be a wild type, then and the patient has already responded to the previous treatment, then I think it is worthwhile re-challenging them. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, I probably agree with you. Definitely, yes. Get a check for the molecular profile again at progression, and if it still continues to be wild type or mutant, decide accordingly. And also, you'd probably be more comfortable if somebody's had a good response in the prior first line and second lines to the same therapy. And the duration of response is also very important, something which you need to take into account as well. And so this is a list of options from the NCCN as well. And as you can see here is again regorafenib and TAS-102 or immunotherapy. These are all third line options. So this is something which Dr. KK also was talking about in his talk. So what is this chemo-free regimen in metastatic colorectal cancer, especially in BRAF mutant right-sided colon? Yeah, probably any of the medical oncologists? Karthik or Bhavesh or Jovita?
I think Shivkumar is online. I think Shivkumar wants to speak.
Shiva has come.
Kripa, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
You have to stop.
So welcome, and as a present, we're giving you this question. The role of the chemo-free regimen in metastatic colorectal cancer. And
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Kripa, I'm aware of this Optimox strategies, but if you take the Crystal trial or any other trial, they tried with either cetuximab monotherapy or cetuximab with FOLFOX as a maintenance strategies.
So we're talking
and
about
there are also
the chemo-free regimen in BRAF mutant right-sided.
you are asking about right-sided.
BRAF mutant.
Recently, there's a trial.
Yeah, hello.
Recently, there has been approved.
Yeah, go ahead.
Recently, there's an trial which has been approved. The BRAF inhibitor, MEK inhibitor, and cetuximab.
Absolutely. So you'll be talking about the Beacon study, which was by Dr. Axel Grothi, which looked at, like JC was rightly pointing out, encorafenib plus binimetinib plus cetuximab, which is basically a BRAF and a MEK inhibitor along with an EGFR inhibitor. So that's shown a lot of activity, and it's been approved as well in patients with BRAF mutant metastatic colorectal cancer in the second line and beyond. So probably, that's the chemo-free regimen that we are alluding to. And
okay, so I think we are running short of time.
Yeah, I'll get to that. Sure, I'll probably get to the last part of it. So just your thoughts on maintenance therapy as well. Anybody does maintenance, or how do we do it? Do you continue the chemotherapy as well, or only the targeted therapy, and do you reintroduce it, or do you keep continuing the targeted therapy? How do we do it in practice?
We like to Kripa.
Yeah, go ahead, Shiva.
It's basically how the patient responded to the initial regimen. So suppose if the patient has responded robust enough, the response is good, and I think a chemo-free period is a logical option. So some patients are in clinical practice, if they had a good response, they're a bit agitated if they are off period from the chemo.
Would you continue both the chemo
Definitely.
and the targeted?
No. I like to continue with some form of oral therapy like capecitabine. Then if he progresses again, I can change it to the first line, which I again given earlier.
So I think most of the data is that, I mean, like you could look at continuing the targeted therapy as well. And based on all these studies, they've looked at, all these studies have looked at continuing the targeted therapy as well. So yeah, I mean, like that's what I do in practice as well. I try to stop the chemotherapy, and because, you know, most of them end up having toxicities from chemotherapy as well, and try to keep the targeted therapy continuing until progression. Yeah,
What
so
about
probably,
what
if
about
we have time, we can probably take this. This will probably be the last thing. Somebody with liver limited metastasis, what should be the approach? I know we have a couple of surgeons with us today. So Dr. Polom or Dr. Mohan Raj, if you can take this. And if you can take this.
We are talking of synchronous metastasis here?
Yeah, absolutely. Synchronous metastasis, liver limited metastatic disease. Yeah.
So there's no standard sequential treatment for this
So
synchronous
what would be your
metastasis.
approach, and how would you look at classifying them? Let's say, for example, you have somebody with a resectable liver limited metastatic disease.
Right. If it's a resectable liver
Yeah.
limited metastasis, I would like to operate on the patient first. And if it's a small volume liver disease, probably I would like to operate the colon as well as the liver together. That is one point. Secondly, if there is unresectability at the metastatic or the primary site, then the question of staging the surgery with, systemic therapy comes in. So this is how I would go approach a patient. Of course, this is taking the fact that the patient is stable and has not come in with symptoms of obstruction, bleeding, or impending perforation, which of course in that scenario we would have to surgically look into that part or resect or probably divert the disease. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Mohan Raj, any comments from you?
Yeah, ma'am. Generally, we follow is we generally give a chemotherapy, systemic therapy, followed by the.
Yeah, Mohan, yeah, go ahead. Hello. Yeah, I couldn't hear you. Hello, Mohan, can you go ahead?
Hello.
Yeah, Mohan, can you go ahead?
Yeah, yes, sir. Sir, in our cancer center, we generally give a systemic therapy followed by reassessment. Depending on which is difficult to resect, that we try to resect first. If upfront liver is difficult to resect, then we try to resect first, followed by treatment of primary. If upfront primary is difficult to resect, then we try to resect primary, followed by the liver metastasis.
Yeah. So yeah, probably yes, Mohan, you're right. So I mean, like we have data from the EORTC study as to that you would probably like to give chemotherapy and then attempt a resection, and I'll just quickly get to that.
Yeah, you can. Okay, Dr. Kripa, we can.
So yeah, basically the advantages are that you're looking at tumor shrinkage, and the disadvantages are that probably if the tumor progresses, then it becomes unresectable as well. And then again with chemotherapy, you have you could develop sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, or what the surgeons describe as a blue liver. And irinotecan induced steatohepatitis is another issue which has actually been correlated with increased mortality as well. So again, there is no role for any targeted therapy as far as liver-limited resectable metastatic disease is concerned. You only have to lead in with chemotherapy, and adding targeted therapy actually led to a shorter PFS. So yeah,
thank you, Dr.
Kripa. I'll probably conclude with that. Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much. As we move on to the next discussion, I request all the speakers, chairperson, and the same panelists to continue, okay? And so that we can finish I'll share my screen. Yeah, quickly we continue at this stage. Very good evening to everybody. Okay, just quickly, few ASCO updates and how we go about. This I took from the ASCO educational book. So there was a write-up on redefining colorectal cancer by the tumor biology. And I just want one comment from Anuradha, then Dr. Chandramaleshwari, Dr. Radhakrishnan, Vinod, and Dr. Ganesh Venkatraman. This is what is given in the ASCO guidelines. Are we doing it? Or what is difficult in India? Anybody?
I think these markers are covered during the NGS. I think if you do this panel, all these markers are being covered. So I think it is preferential to do it, and we can easily do it.
You can easily do it in all
Yes,
centers.
it is doable.
Maybe at your center. What about Dr. Ganesh, Dr. Chandramouleshwari, and Dr. Vinod? Do you run NGS always? Though NGS is there, the testing modality everywhere, do you do?
Ma'am, it will depend upon the mutation size detection. So generally, a real-time PCR with a Cobas platform works fine. So mutation detection can be done on that. The mismatch repair and the HER2 expression can be done by immunohistochemistry, where it is not difficult at all. So the mutation detection can be done very easily, and it is done using real-time PCR on a Cobas platform.
I think, but doing on Cobas will be like, we'll be wasting time because there's not a multiplex PCR.
It's not multiplex. It's
yeah,
not.
We'll have to do one by one marker.
Serial. We have to do serial. Yeah,
yes. So that's not been feasible. I think it's not feasible.
Dr. Vinod, have we started doing NTRK because the drug will be shortly available? Dr. Vinod? Or anybody can take this. So that's what the ASCO educational book tells us needed for a metastatic colorectal cancer. Yes, Anuradha?
Yes, we can definitely buy on NGS. We have got few positive cases on NTRK fusions where we are doing it routinely on 52 gene fusion panel, an Amplisig fusion panel. And it is very much doable. I do not agree for the Cobas where but NGS is definitely ideal platform to do it.
Okay. I have one quick
Vinod, yes, please.
Yes, the NGS part, what's really happening in the scenario is like once we have curated the data, what's happening is like because this region, whatever mutations and also the variants, they call like a variable number tandem repeats. When you try to do this NGS sequencing, like we had a tons of data, but the point is like how to make it effectively, and then back to the physician is a real challenging issue in this case.
Yeah, that's the because you have a big data set from which you will have to come out. So that's the challenge with NGS.
Yeah, but I think what are the markers are seen where we are doing 52 gene panel, focus panel. All these markers are being covered. They are all targeted. It's not they're not the whole exome sequencing where we need to have having huge data coverage and.
Yeah, but sometimes it's quite difficult for us to run it because of the cost factor. But even if you see the what the ASCO this time says, that try to do the KRAS, that is the pan-RAS upfront with the BRAF and DNA MMR. And if the patient fails, if you see the last point, then you go for HER2 amplification, the ALK-ROS and NTRK1 to be considered only in refractory disease. So upfront is just the first three markers. And that's why we are here tonight. We have very eminent molecular oncologists, geneticists, and pathologists. So that's a discussion, remains a debate whether we run the entire panel with all the genes or we do just genes with targets so that it fits to the population.
Ma'am, again, doing one by one this gene is going to take time, and it's not going to be cost-effective test.
Okay, fine. And they are doing molecular profiling of colon cancer, and these were some of the posters from ASCO. Quick question to our surgeons. Paulomi is there, Dr. Mohan Raj is there. Okay, potentially resectable tumor. Do you give any targeted drugs? You know you will be able to resect, but you are not very sure, or maybe borderline resectably. Any role of targeted EGFR, the tumor is wild RAS positive.
I think we had a very good discussion by Dr. Krishna Kumar. And if I'm able to get the patient within 6 to 8 weeks to operate without too much of chemotherapy pumped in, I think that's the best regime I would like. And he said cetuximab works better than bevacizumab. The other problem with Bevax is if you have not taken care of the primary tumor, there's a problem with bleeding and tumor perforation that we also have to see. So these are the few factors. I think I would consider cetuximab by what Dr. Krishna Kumar has already told us in his discussion.
Yeah, that's good. And Dr. Mohan Raj, your thought process, will you consider an anti-EGFR along with the chemo partner, because you know you're going to operate in a couple of weeks from now? Dr. Mohan Raj?
I think he's left, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. Kripa here.
Okay,
so, probably I can take this as well. I mean, like, I think we have very clear data from the EPOCH study as well, which show that addition of a targeted therapy, especially in patients with resectable colorectal liver cancer, has not shown to improve the benefit. In fact, the PFS was actually worse off when you had tried to add a targeted therapy in resectable liver metastasis. So I think the take home should be that don't do targeted therapy in patients who have resectable liver metastasis, and chemotherapy alone is good enough.
Yeah, this was a study from this last ASCO where they have tried to look into using panitumumab with FOLFIRI in just borderline operable and operable colorectal metastatic RAS wild type. The radiological response rate was 65% with the manageable grade 3 diarrhea, progression free. Overall survival was still going on, and they commented that the surgical difference did not matter much, but anyhow the tumor shrinkage was quite appreciable by using the anti-EGFR. But then we don't have progression free survival. This was present in the last ASCO. Like, yes, some people are comfortable in doing what Dr. Poulami said regarding the use of anything which shrinks the tumor. Okay, next quick question to Dr. Smita is there with us, Dr. Bhabesh, Dr. Jovita, Dr. Karthik. Please take this question. What drugs will you use after hearing so much, metastatic CRC wild type? Isn't it difficult to choose? To all the medical oncologists.
Dr. Smita here, madam.
I couldn't hear you, Smita. Speak.
Cetuximab will choose for the wild type RAS mutated, wild type patients available, and we have more experience with cetuximab than panitumumab.
Panitumumab, yes, cetuximab. How comfortable are you with doublet or triplet?
Doublet. We are not currently practicing triplet therapy. Cetuximab is with doublet. Doublet is FOLFOX or FOLFIRI.
FOLFIRI. So higher response rate, this was again a study from ASCO this year with unresectable liver mets with all regimes. Once you use the cetuximab along with the triplet, there was definitely increase in the overall response rate to 86, to the median progression-free survival was 15, and median overall survival was 55, and that was highest considering all of them taken together. Now, let's move on to the next stage. So you need to balance the risk and benefit in a metastatic colorectal cancer. And so as Smita said, doublet with cetuximab is the choice. Okay. Is there any patient whom you would like to use otherwise? Patient is any contraindications for cetuximab? Smita, please.
Yes, I did not get the question clearly.
Any contraindications for using cetuximab, or you are very comfortable with everybody cetuximab?
So we had one patient, I remember, with a hypersensitivity reaction to cetuximab when we changed to panitumumab.
Okay, you think panitumumab has a lesser hypersensitivity reaction?
Yes.
What about magnesium toxicity, hypo?
That is more with panitumumab.
More with panitumumab, okay. So preferably a cetuximab with a doublet or a triplet. But in this particular ASCO, there was a lot of discussion using FOLFIRI, NOX, that means using oxaliplatin, irinotecan. Okay, that I do not, and I want also comments from the other medical oncologists. If you use the 3 backbone chemos, how do you go about later? Or is it viable option in India? They might have used. What about us? Dr. Karthik, Dr. Bhavesh, Jovita?
I don't think the patients in our scenario will tolerate the triplet, ma'am. Other than a young fit individual, most of the patients, they won't tolerate triplet upfront. So I'll be comfortable using a doublet along with an anti-EGFR target for a wild type mutated cancer, ma'am. And then, as you said, we would have another agent if the patient recurs again. So we don't have much of chemotherapy when we use all the agents upfront, so that agent can be used later when it reverts back.
Let small different from here. I think reaction.
Please tell me.
So if you look at the scenario, people who are going into second line chemotherapy are very less, and again, financial toxicity of using a different targeted agent is also high. And most of them try to have the first line chemotherapy. To have a different viewpoint in this, if the patient is fit enough to get a FOLFIRINOX, we use it for pancreatic cancer. Even though doses are different, but we use it for pancreatic cancer, FOLFIRINOX upfront. as a adjuvant therapy.
Particularly, yes,
If the patient is fit and if you want to give it, I think first hit must be the best hit. And you can give PFS. Even though the sequencing has not been asked, the question of giving the second therapy, which drug would you utilize, everything is a question, but still you give a good first line survival. I think you can bet it if the patient is good, having a good fitness, then you can go ahead to play with the agent.
Yeah, and yes, that's the roadmap. And this particular ASCO mainly discussed about the should we intensify and more discussion of giving the triplet, particularly in the poor prognostic individuals, which is the right-sided tumors, BRAF tumors. When you don't have the BRAF molecule with you, then FOLFIRINOX, the 3 triplet with the towards the chemotherapy backbone. But I do understand from the other panelists, yes, it's difficult in India if you don't have drugs. Quickly, Dr. Bhavesh, are you comfortable with the irinotecan or oxaliplatin? Which is easier to manage?
I have used most of the time oxaliplatin as first line, and I am happy with it because when I have combined 5-FU based therapy with irinotecan, mucositis and diarrhea has been a big problem. So usually I go with the oxaliplatin because the side effect profile is different and it is much more manageable.
How is the peripheral neuropathy with oxaliplatin? See, with irinotecan, what I feel is the diarrhea, if you give prophylactic, it is controllable and it subsides with the cycle over. It's not a cumulative toxicity. But in oxaliplatin, people do have reduced quality of life. Any thought process from the other?
Ma'am, not all patients, the neuropathy is present, ma'am. Neuropathy is present in only a few number of patients. As you said, oxaliplatin causes a very bad permanent neuropathy. It's very bothersome in some patients. And if you can identify them in the earlier, in the 4th cycle, you can easily stop the oxaliplatin in such patients and switch on to the other drug. But as I said, irinotecan is not so friendly as compared to oxaliplatin. Oxaliplatin, we are very much friendly drug compared to irinotecan. It has causes very bad neutropenias, very bad diarrheas in some patients. Sometimes they end up very bad febrile neutropenia, sepsis. So I think oxaliplatin is a better drug. And again, to address the issue of peripheral neuropathy, if you identify it early and then stop the drug, I think avoid such patients.
One more issue I face with oxaliplatin is the venous pain that we get with the patients, the phlebitis. So to reduce that, we could actually have preheated saline and also hot compress. This I often see with the patients.
Yeah, okay. So that's all. There is no direct comparison between the two. Both the drugs are approved at the same level of evidence, but just my thought process, I usually use irinotecan maybe because of availability, whatever the reason it is, and comfortable also using. Okay, that's it. But anyhow, both the drugs are approved for this. Now let's get into this study. You have already heard about the beacon. Any thought process? You have seen the slides with Dr. Kripa and how to go about it. See, medical oncologist. There is one radiation oncologist with us, Dr. Madhurika. Okay. Yes, please. Your thought process. Anybody can take the question. What will you use for BRAF? These drugs are will.
Anita ma'am, can you hear me?
I think our screen has got freezed. I think Krupa Shankar, you can comment on this because you did not get time during the discussion.
So yeah, Bhavesh, I think that's probably, applies to a small subset of patients, less than 10% of patients, right side. If we look at the incidence of BRAF mutation, it accounts for around 6 to 8% roughly in the right-sided colorectal cancer. So this appears to be a promising chemo-free regimen in that aspect, but it only applies to a select subset of patients who have a BRAF mutation. Because otherwise, the beauty of this concept is lost otherwise. And the thing is, you have a BRAF plus MEK inhibition, and the concept behind why you would want to do a BRAF plus MEK inhibitor is that when you do only a BRAF inhibitor, then you have increased MEK expression, which can actually lead to an increase in cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas as well. So to prevent that from happening, you actually combine it with a MEK inhibitor as well. And then on top of that, you're adding a EGFR blocker as well. So I think that's interesting. I think Anita ma'am is back. Yeah, you can take over.
I have a small question to you in this context. See, basically, we don't use cetuximab in patients who are RAS wild type. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in the downstream pathway of BRAF, BRAF is more downstream than RAS. So, if you look at such a patient, why do we use the cetuximab again in this trial? The cetuximab really there are some hypotheses of crosstalk of between other pathways. But why do we use cetuximab? Why don't we use only encorafenib and binimetinib?
So again, there was an arm in this. Yeah, so there was another arm as well which looked at only encorafenib plus binimetinib alone in this study as well, JC, to answer that question.
So there was an arm only with encorafenib, and there was an arm with encorafenib with FOLFOX, cetuximab with FOLFOX, encorafenib, binimetinib, and FOLFOX, and cetuximab.
No. The doublet arm did not have cetuximab.
Yeah, they did not have cetuximab.
Yeah, correct. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. And even in the doublet arm as well, there was a benefit.
Yeah.
And adding cetuximab also seemed to increase the magnitude of benefit.
That was not compared with the trial actually. Though it was
it was not meant for comparison because the control arm was only chemotherapy. The control arm was only chemotherapy. Where you try to compare it with either a doublet or triplet, and the doublet being only a BRAF plus MEK inhibitor, triplet being a BRAF plus MEK inhibitor plus an EGFR inhibitor.
This doubt I was having really because for a long time we were explaining that as we have a RAS mutation which is downstream that of the EGFR inhibitors doesn't work. And now BRAF is more downstream than RAS. It has a mutation and we use cetuximab. Is this really driven by company or is this a real fact?
Yes. Okay, can we go to the choice of third line? What is your... Okay, any thought process about you? This again, another paper discussed in ASCO. What would be your third line choice? Over there, they'll try to look into regorafenib and an anti-EGFR. And if you see the median overall survival was in the anti-EGFR arm was 15.2 months, provided you have not used it earlier, and a p-value of a significant p-value was seen with anti-EGFR uses. And so that was one of the study. Elderly patient, thought process for any of the panelists. How do you treat? Quickly, any one of them. Smita, Kripa or Karthik, Dr. Bhabesh?
So in third line, usually as I told before also, that I would like to use single agent regorafenib better because usually the patients are not in a very good PS where they can come and take therapies again and again in the hospital. So it's very difficult practically, but if the patient is really in a good PS, then definitely this is a good option.
Okay.
I agree with Dr. Bhavesh. Regorafenib we are using in third line if feasible.
Yeah, that paper was from ASCO. You are very good. Now coming to this PANDA study, they did it on an elderly patient, and the conclusion of the study was that they have similar outcome. In India, we are very we think that okay, 70 and all, we are all afraid, but then there's more aging population. Now the profile of patients you will get coming in 60s and 70s. So this study looked into what is the benefit of cetuximab with FOLFIRI, even in the elderly patient. And if you see the overall response rate and the median progression-free survival was almost same, whether you're less than 70 or more than 70 using cetuximab and FOLFIRI. There was another study on second line in elderly where they looked into, so usually these patients don't come into the trial, but in this particular trial, it was seen that even the second line trial survival outcomes were almost similar with that of younger adults. And so again, it's a little bit why I brought these papers for discussion. I think all of you will agree with me. Above 70, we are all a little hesitant whether to go. Many of us said that we'll put them on oral drugs at home. And again, quick thought process before we go to the next question. Elderly, they are going into second line now. And if you see the last graph, the young and the older within 70 are almost at the same level. Any panelists, please? Jovita, Dr. Karthik.
Again, in second line, once we have used a single agent in the first line, then we would have used, we will use another.
It's an elderly.
Yes, ma'am. If you have used only single agent in upfront in first line, then another single agent we will be comfortably using in the second line, ma'am.
Okay, maybe the oral drugs also.
Yeah, oral drugs.
Yeah. Okay, we have already heard about MSI high and DMMR. Yes, the keynote study was also presented in this ASCO, why it's separating of the curve and there's favoring pembrolizumab. Okay, so okay, just quick question to one of you. At what point of time will you bring in the immunotherapy into the picture?
So, ma'am, Dr. Bhavesh here. With this data, if it is positive, which is usually 5% to 8% only, I would like to use immunotherapy pembrolizumab in first line itself. And definitely beyond second and third line, definitely yes. So this is the first data which is very convincing to use.
Yeah. Okay, is Dr. Madhulika there with us? I think she is signed up for us. Ashish, can you check?
Ma'am, she's logged out.
She's logged out. Okay, I had a question for her. Okay, this was another interesting paper from ASCO and anal cancer. Anybody can take this, where they use cetuximab in metastatic small cell carcinoma of the anal canal. Okay, thought process from the oncologist. Dr. Krishnan is there? Dr. Krishnan? Dr. Krishnan?
Ma'am,
okay,
Dr. Krishnan is not there.
Anybody can take the question. This was another interesting study which I got it from ASCO this year. Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam, anybody can take the question. They use that anti-EGFR plus immunotherapy in advanced squamous cell carcinoma of the anal canal, and the combination of abelumab and cetuximab reached the primary endpoint, showing promising activity with a manageable toxicity profile, and it deserves a clinical investigation. So it's one of the studies, not much we have in anal canal, where cetuximab along with abelumab was used to see the response, overall response rate. So, a quick question on HER2 new positive tumors. Any of the medical oncologists?
No experience of HER2, anti-HER2 use in colorectal cancer.
Okay, Smita, thank you. Abid?
Same here, ma'am. No,
yes,
it is just prognosticate. That's what I remember, but I have not used any anti-HER2 for any treatment.
Okay, any other Kripa, Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam, Jayachandran, Karthik?
No, we have not used it, ma'am.
At all, not. But
not come across it. Yes.
Okay, and Jovita?
Ma'am, now that the molecular tests are evolving and we see that HER2 can be positive, especially in a refractory case, maybe we will definitely want to know if HER2 is positive and then try to use in that. We're only extrapolating the
it's to be.
Yes.
It is there in the molecular markers to be done in a refractory cases. Destiny is this trial, and the drug is trastuzumab DXT, which was used, and that's what the design of the study, and it had showed a good response rate. But yes, a thought process to be considered, because we may have patients who are surviving several lines, and the patient wants therapy from us. So think of these markers. I think that brings us to the end. We have little overshooted the time, and I will stop sharing my screen in case we have few questions in the chat box. We will try to say it next. What do you think about ALK and ROS role in colorectal cancer? How much percentage? Dr. Vani Ufat. Oh, I think you have placed the questions. Kashish has already placed the questions. Quickly, anybody wants to take this question? Role of ALK and ROS in colorectal cancer.
Dr. Anita, going with literature, it is just about 1 to 2%. Not many has been reported. So it's probably one of those emerging markers. Probably we may have to see.
Okay.
That's what the literature says.
It's very early. Okay.
Yeah, it's very early.
Okay. Anybody has experience with the drugs in the Beacon trial, the BRAF inhibitors? Dr. Bhabesh has asked to the this thing. Dr. Kripa, you presented the study.
Yeah, ma'am. So basically the thing is, we don't have those inhibitors which are available right now. Only thing that we have is dabrafenib plus tremetinib from Novartis. That's the only BRAF and MEK inhibitor that we have currently available in India. And just to touch on that, the rationale behind why we do this is, in BRAF mutant colorectal cancer, the point is when you use only BRAF inhibitors, there can be the receptors can get upregulated, and there can be a signaling pathway which again gets activated, which is the EGFR signaling pathway can get reactivated. And that is the rationale as to why these EGFR inhibitors were actually added on. So we've all known the results as well, and now it's become an approved option. FDA has approved it as well. The only thing is we don't have access to those drugs yet.
These drugs are not available here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Anita Vinod had asked about the role of liquid biopsy in seeing CEA for surveillance of an operated colorectal cancer.
I think liquid biopsy is useful in monitoring of the RAS mutations, whether it is turned up from mutant to wild type, and we can do the serial monitoring in this. So I think liquid biopsy is essential in doing the RAS biomarkers.
Okay, for surveillance of the patients. Next, please. Dr. Bhabesh, borderline MCRC, wild RAS type, mutated BRAF, high MSI. What will be the choice of your treatment for conversion? I think we discussed the role of anti-EGFR. Okay. Should adjuvant, Dr. Purvesh Parekh, should adjuvant chemotherapy given to patients post R0 resection if it is fit 78-year female? Any of the medical oncologists? Elderly, because there was a lot of data in this ASCO talking about the elderly patients. PANDA study, there was again another study looking into second line, because now the population is aging. Any remarks from our medical oncologist? Elderly, I think you will have this type of patients with you.
Yeah, hi ma'am, Kripa here. So the thing is, when you're talking about an elderly patient as well, I think the stage matters. I mean, I don't know what sir is asked by what stage. Probably if you're talking about a stage 2, probably if you're talking about stage 2 and colorectal cancer, and then you'd want to do an MSA as well before you take a call on whether you want to give chemotherapy to this patient or not. But in general, the benefit of chemotherapy in stage 2 for more than 70 years has not been proven. I mean, in general, all the trials, if you look at the SEER database and all the other studies as well, more than 70 years, the benefit of adjuvant chemotherapy in stage 2 colorectal cancer has not been established.
Yeah, provided the risk is low. Another question from Dr. Purvesh Parekh. NGS is attractive. What should we keep in mind when you order in a newly diagnosed patient with a metastatic cancer? Anybody, Anuradha, Dr. Chandramalleshwari, anybody can take.
The tumor content has to be looked upon while selecting the block, and that's the main important. And we need to have a broader panel which includes all the diagnostic, prognostic, and the predictive markers in this at the upfront. Yeah.
And Dr. Pam, Dr. Chandra Mauleshwari, how to testing modality in colorectal cancer? Modality means, okay, I know, anybody can take this. And I also have one question for the surgeons. Okay. Okay. One more question for the surgeons. Dr. Paulomi, what is the role of robotic hemicolectomy in a resectable colon cancer?
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Paulomi.
See, right now we do not have role of robotics. Yes, it's evolving. It's a very good for surgeons. It is another toy to play around with. But where the surgical, the long-term effects or the oncological effects are concerned, we do not still know. The data is yet to mature, unlike the laparoscopy. Number two is it gives a very good ergonomic benefit to the surgeons who are doing it. And also from the surgeon's point of view, the skill curve is not so steep as that is in a laparoscopy. So it's easy to pick up robotics. Where the patient is concerned, I think robotic and laparoscopic surgery, they all have better results, short-term results in terms of pain scores, or getting out of the hospital scores, getting back to work scores. But where laparoscopy has been shown that the long-term data compared to an open is similar. It does not have an edge. Robotic, like I said, is still maturing. But yes, it is a very good thing for the surgeons, and also short-term, we have very good results as compared to an open surgery. So yes, it's something that, we are still waiting for the long-term oncological data on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for the to everybody to participate. If Dr. Purvish Parikh, can I request you to give a concluding remark? Sir is there?
Ma'am, Parikh sir is not there.
Parikh is there, and Dr. Krishnan is also not there. Okay, then I'll conclude saying that thank you very much. And we did have a colorectal webinar earlier also. So this time we tried to look into the different angle of colorectal cancer. I'm happy we had geneticist, molecular oncologist, pathologist. We had surgeons with us and medical oncologists. We couldn't involve our radiation oncologist, maybe next time. Thanks to the chairperson, the speakers, and the panelists for being with us. Thanks to Kashish and his team for excellent digital platform. I thank my secretary Vijay Bharati for putting everything together. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected. Namaskar.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.